Setting up a grid and working with master pages in Photoshop, or also known as parent pages. So depending on what type of file that you're working on, you may be working on a multiple page document, something like I have here with 12 pages, that might require me to have a parent page set up. Again, the parent pages are great for ensuring that I have multiple items that are showing up on each page in my document. And this works great for grids as well. So the first thing to remember is that when you are creating a grid in InDesign, it is very useful to use the Create Guides function under layout in order to create that. So I just want to show you a couple of things to keep in mind when you are using the Create Guides function. So right now I have my document set up. It's just an 8.5 by 11, 12-page document. I have a 1/2 inch margin set up here, and I'm going to go over to Create Guides. And keep in mind, I'm just working right now on page 1 in my file. So turning my preview on so I can actually see the guides be placed in my document in real time. I can have the ability to add as many rows and columns as I would like. One thing that is really important is that when you are fitting your guides to your page, in order to optimize typesetting and working with typography, it is best to choose fit guides to margins instead of fit guides to page. So when you are fitting guides to your page, you can see they are evenly distributed from one end of the page to the other. And if I choose fit guides to margin, you can see that the modules here, the grid is evenly distributed based on the margin setting. So this works best when you are working with columns, multiple paragraphs of text. That would be your best option to go to. Another thing to keep in mind here is that when you are working with your grid, this right now is a modular grid. We have boxes that are being created, rows and columns that would create a modular grid. If I only wanted to work with a column grid, I could remove all of the rows inside of that option there. One thing to keep in mind is that if you are working with columns of text, if you have an odd amount of columns here, then you are gearing your layout to be a little bit more asymmetrically laid out. So if that is your intention, that's great. If I wanted to have a column here left clean or empty and just focus on placing the text in these columns, that would work a lot better. If I'm working with an even amount of columns, I have the flexibility to work with a more symmetrical layout. So I could divide my page essentially in half versus an odd amount where I don't really have that option. So depending on what your layout intentions are, that is up to you, and you have complete control over how you want to be using your grid. So I'm going to just choose a 7 by 7 grid here for the demo and press OK. Okay, so right now I have my grid laid out on page 1 only. You can see I didn't apply the grid to any other page in my file. If I wanted to have the grid showing up on every page, that would be a good idea to lay that out on the parent page. So before we do that, I just want to show you one thing here. So it is important to note that when you are working with guides, they are live, which means that I can go in and actually select these lines on my grid. So you can imagine if I start placing in imagery, if I start placing in imagery here, and also start to work with some text. That if I wanted to move things around or grab things, I might intentionally or unintentionally grab my grid by accident. So that can be a little bit problematic. So what I do usually recommend, if you are working in a file where the grid is going to be, you're working maybe on a one-page document, you only need one grid, or every page is using a different grid, that the grid itself is created on a separate layer or also on your master page. So if I only had one page in my document, it's not necessary to have a master page. I could use it, but I could also use layer 1 for my grid. Okay. And then I would also want another layer here for my text. And I would want another layer for my imagery. This should actually go above imagery. That would make a little bit more sense when I'm working if I want to put my text on top of my images. So obviously, right now, this text frame is in the grid layer. So I'm going to move that up to text. And this image is on the grid layer. So I'm going to move that up to imagery. If I select my grid, you can see this is on the grid layer and I can lock it. And now I am not able to select any of the lines that I created here on my grid. So depending on how you're working, this is a really good practice to keep in mind. So I'm going to revert back. I'm just going to, actually we can keep those. I'm going to delete my grid off of page 1. And we're going to apply the grid now to the parent page. So I'm going to go up here to my parent section. Okay. So what I'm actually going to do in this case is rename this grid layer to master page. This is something that is recommended to have, or this could actually be also known as parent page, same difference. So having your parent page dedicated on its own layer is a good practice, and I'll show you why in a couple of minutes. But it allows me to move this layer above or below certain elements. So let's first go in and create our grid on our parent page. So it's the same idea, create guides. You can see right now I only have one page highlighted, but it is still applying the grid to the entire spread. Okay. So let's work with a 6x6 grid. It doesn't always have to be 2 even numbers. It could be a 6x7 grid. Again, depending on your intention and your layout, you would want to always choose a grid that works for you. Okay, so I've applied my grid to my parent page. So let's take a look at our document now. And we can see it is now available on every page in my spread. Let's say, for example, I wanted a different grid on page 5 and 4, for example. So what I'm going to do here is create a new parent page. So you might want a different grid because maybe you're doing a cover page. You don't really need that many columns or rows, or perhaps you're doing a photo grid and you want more larger spaces available on there. So for whatever reason, if I wanted a different grid on another page, what I could go in here and do is create a different grid. Actually, let's do something a little bit different. Instead of, well, we will change the grid, but let's also change the margins here. So I can show you how that works as well. So again, right now we're working only with 1/2 inch margins. Let's say I wanted larger margins on the B parent. So instead of going to create guides, if I wanted to adjust my margins, I would go up to layout, margins, and columns here. And here I can go in and change the margins on the page. If I wanted asymmetrical margins, I could go in and adjust that accordingly. Okay, so I'm gonna do that to the left side and also to the right side. Okay, so now let's go in and add our grid. So that's how you would change the margins in your layout. And again, margins are great for working with text. Keeping the text contained within the margins. So let's say this is the specific grid I wanted on these 2 pages. Maybe I was going to use this as a guide to place in some images in this section here. So here I'm going to press OK. So there's the B parent page. As you can see here, all of the pages in my document are still modeled after the A parent. And you can see that here inside the pages panel, they all have the little A in the top corners of the pages. So if I wanted to apply the B parent to 4 and 5, like I mentioned before, very simply, all you have to do is drag the page down. Okay, so you can see I dragged page, the B parent to page 4. Now we have B there, and you can see it's updated in my file. So I'm going to do the same thing to page 5, and it automatically updates here. If for whatever reason I wanted no grid on a page, let's say this was a cover, I can always use the no or none master page to apply that, and that essentially has no style, so it's not affected by the master pages. So that might be a good idea, let's say for a front cover and maybe for a back cover. If I were to go into the parent page and maybe add like a header or a footer on my document, which I am going to do right now. So let's go back up to the A parent page. And let's just create some graphic elements here. So I'm going to create a bar. A black bar on one side, and let's say a red bar, just to make it a little bit interesting here, on the right side. Okay. So now if we go back to our pages, we can see that that graphic is now applied to every A parent page in my document. So next thing here is I wanted to just clarify why I placed the parent page as a separate layer. So let's say I'm working with this image here, and I want it to be placed behind the graphic on the bottom. So right now, I mean, I could just crop it, but depending on what it is that you're working on, maybe it's covering a header, the image that you have on the parent page. So let's say I went in here and just created a text box. Change that text to white. Okay, so let's say that had some information that was needed, a caption on the page or information about the book title or whatever the case may be that I'm creating. And I'm going back here. So again, this is completely covering that information, right? So what I can do is, with a little bit more ease to my design, is I can take my parent page and my layers panel and move that, let's say, above imagery. Oh, I think I put that on a different layer. I can move that above imagery, and now I can see my graphic. So what I just did here was a mistake. I guess I deleted that text by accident, perhaps. So let me just add that back in. So possibility. Yes, it's there. My apologies. So I'm going to just take this and put it back on the master page. There we go. Okay, I can do this one. Okay, so let's go back to our pages. Page 2, and there we go. So everything that's on the parent page should always remain on that layer. And now I can again move that layer. So if it's below the imagery, it's hidden, and if it is above, it is visible. So it is a good practice to, as I say, always place your parent page items on their own layer. This way you can always shift it inside of your document, and always pay attention to, when you are creating additional graphics on the parent page, which layer that you are working on, because you could by accident, like I just did, put it on the imagery layer, and then we have to kind of put it back where it belongs.